Good morning and welcome back to O.B.S Financial Services presents our educational series on Learn from the Tax Masters. My name is Stacey Bartel. I'm president of O.B.S Tax, and we're here in Oakbank, Manitoba, for those of you who are tuning in from throughout the country. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been doing these sessions. We've been talking about pay stubs, T4s, T4As, and other tax information slips. And this time of year, it's a good idea to understand what the tax information slips mean and why they're important to come in and bring them in taxes. The one we're going to talk about today is the T2202, and that has to deal with students' tuition and educational amounts that they're entitled to for going to schools. Basically, your school tax receipt. When I was prepping for this, I realized that the amount of information that's involved with students is very complex. For example, when you pay to go to school, here's some of the things that will affect on your tax return. It provides you with tax deductible expenses. It provides you with educational allowances. In order to go to school, you may have taken money out of your RRSPs, dealt with the lifelong learning program, took money out of RESPs, got paid from employment insurance, had employment insurance or the apprenticeship board pay for parts or all of your school. You may have received scholarships, bursaries, grants, awards. You may have taken out student loans. You may have research income and research expenses. And then once you calculate all of your credits and everything else that's involved, we're now dealing with transfers of who can we transfer these funds to, who paid for this school, and a whole bunch of other things. So we're going to kind of tackle that, but it's going to take us 4 or 5 days in order to do it. So if you have kids in school, please tune in. If you don't have any kids in school, aren't going to have any kids in school, and you're past that part in your life, you're welcome to tune in anyways. But make sure you come back early next week because we'll be back on topic with talking about seniors, retirement income, and a whole bunch of other things that go along with it. So please bear with us. Okay, let's start with tuition and educational amounts. When you pay for school, some of the amounts that you pay are tax deductible. And in some cases, the amount of time you spend in school will trigger additional allowances that you can use as a tax deduction. When you pay for school, go to post-secondary school. Now, we're not talking kindergarten to 12. We're talking after that. We're talking career colleges. We're talking college. We're talking university. We're talking specialized schools. When you go to school, in Canada, you'll receive a T2202A. That is your official tax receipt. If you're in the aviation, trucking, or some other types of educational institutions, will issue what's called a TL11, which is a replacement for the T2202. Just that type of schooling does not provide you with the educational allowances. And if you send your kids, or if you go to school abroad, be it in the U.S., be it in other continents, those schools will issue what's called a TL11 as well, and that's for you to use for completing your Canadian tax returns. Now, what's on a T2202? Well, first of all, we're going to talk about the tuition that you paid, all right? When you go and register for school, you pay a lot of fees, okay? You pay for the cost of your courses. There may be student association fees. There's registration fees. You may be paying for parking, insurance, accommodations, dorm rooms, books, access to computer software, access to libraries, a whole slew of things that may be charged. Well, all of those are not tax deductible. So in order to simplify things, the universities, colleges, or educational institutes are required to supply you with a T2202. That will determine the eligible amount of tuition or payments that you made that are tax deductible for the purposes of income tax in your education. Now, when you receive that, it could also be prorated. If you pay for a midterm course, so let's say you go to school from November 1st to February 28th, and the school costs you $1,000. 500 of that was for November and December. The other 500 was for January and February. Well, when you get your TL or your T2202, it's only going to say $500 for tuition. That's because the other $500 is attributed to a different tax year. So even if you don't go to school past February and you don't pay any more money to the school, the following year you need to make sure you're logging into your portal to get your T2202 slip. That's one of the biggest missed ones from people. So make sure you're always going and looking for it. If you went to school at all in the last year to 2 years, spend the time, log into your portal, get the tax slip. Now, I'm talking about logging into the portal because in most cases, universities, colleges do not spend the money to mail these slips out to you. What happens is the students are all given online access to student portals, whether it's Aurora, Hub, there's a few different ones here in Manitoba, depending on which university or college you're going to. But they put the onus on the students to log in. Typically, as soon as you log into your Hub, there's going to be a location there that says get your tax forms, print your T2202s, something along those lines. Click on the link, follow it through, and print, and that's where your T2202 will be stored. Now, the universities don't get them up there at the beginning of January. Normally, you'll find them being posted in the last week of February. I think this year was the first year that they were posted before the 28th of February in most cases. So you have to wait till the end of February to get them, but they will be there. You need to make sure that you log in and get them. So tell your students, or if you're going to school now, don't throw away your user ID and password. You're going to need it next year if you're in school this January or February. So the tuition amounts that they report on there are tax deductibles and non-refundable tax credit. The other two boxes that you're going to see on there is the number of months that you had full-time or part-time student status. So box B is for part-time student status, box C is for full-time student status. Now, what determines whether you're part-time or full-time? It's the amount of credit hours you go to school for in a month. So if you're 9 credit hours or more a month, you get full-time status. If you're over 3 and less than 9, you're considered a part-time student. Now, what does that student status give you? Well, here's a good news, bad news story. Prior to 2017, for at least 24 years that I've been doing taxes, educational allowances have been part of your tax deductions for school. So basically what that means is that for every month that you're a part-time student, the government would allow you an extra $120 a month as an educational allowance to use as a tax deduction. If you're a full-time, it went up to $400 a month. Back in, I believe it was 2007, they introduced textbook allowances federally, which gave you another $65 for full-time and another $20 a month for every month that you went to school to help to go towards paying for textbooks. Now, what were these credits for? Well, they were for the other costs that a student has. They were for the cost to buy computers, cost to buy your textbooks, cost to buy your school supplies, everything and anything to go to school. They know that it's more about the tuition, so they gave you an allowance to help offset the cost of going to school. In 2016, however, when announcing the budget, Mr. Trudeau announced that he would be canceling the educational allowance and textbook allowance credits effective January 1st, 2017. So, while those credits have been around for 20 plus years, they were all kibosh federally in 2017. Now, in most cases, provinces follow suit with what the federal government does, and half of the provinces in Canada, probably more, I think it was a little bit more than half of the provinces in Canada, canceled the provincial credits as well, because the province would give you the same amounts of money. Manitoba, however, is one of the last ones standing. I think for 2018, there's only 2 provinces that are allowed the tuition amounts, and that province is canceling it at the end of this year. So going into next year, unless something changes in our budget, Manitoba will be the last one standing that offer an educational allowance. So you always want to make sure that you've got that there. Now, I've talked about receipts and everything else. For those of you parents or students that are diligent, you're hanging on to every textbook receipt, you're hanging on to every receipt of everything that it costs you. Unfortunately, they don't help us out. That's what we get on our tax returns, so they never allowed us to, so with getting rid of that credit, they never increased anything else so we can deduct. They just cut the tax credits down for students completely. So don't worry about saving the cost of the receipts, computers, everything else for tax purposes. Hang on to them for yourself. You can sell your, in some cases, you can sell your textbooks and everything else depending on whether they've got a new version out for the next year. But tax purposes, yeah, there's nothing we can do about it. So I do apologize for that. Now, let's talk about how to claim these credits. So first of all, it needs to be understood that educational credits are considered a non-refundable tax credit. What that term means is that you can use those tax credits to reduce the amount of tax that you owe the federal and or provincial government down to zero. They're not refundable, which means that if you don't owe any money in tax, you're not going to get any money because you spent that. They're only going to allow you to use it to reduce the amount of tax that you have. Now, fortunately, they do allow us to carry these over. So, with non-refundable tax credits, some of them, if you can't use them, you lose them. Student credits, they actually allow you to do two things with them if you have more credits than you need for that tax year. We're going to talk about that right away, but I guess the one thing that I did miss is who can claim the tuition? The student is always the first person to claim the tuition. Even if your parents, grandparents, or somebody else is paying for the tuition, those amounts cannot be transferred if the student is in a taxable situation and can use those credits. Now, if they can't use the credits, one of the first things we can do is we can transfer. We can transfer those credits to a parent, grandparent, or spouse up to the first $5,000 for that year. Now, when we used to have the federal educational allowances, we weren't able to transfer, we don't end up with more credits than we could transfer. But if you live in Manitoba, you go to school in Manitoba, and you're in universities or colleges, normally your tuition is going to be right around that $5,000 mark, so you should be able to transfer most of it. But if you have more credits than you can transfer, they will carry forward to future years. So what that means is, I dealt with a tax return yesterday where my client went to school in the U.S. and has been back for 4 years and finally used up all the tuition tax credits because his schooling was costing him $40,000 to $50,000 a year. So you are able to use those tax credits year after year after year after year after year. However, you can only use them again to reduce the amount of tax you owe to the government down to zero. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Your tax preparer, the federal government, keeps track of what's being carried over. So if you're switching tax preparers or if you're unsure, you can always talk to your new tax preparer. We have access to log in through our represent a client, pull that information down for you to make sure that you're not missing any of those credits. I do want to touch base before we finish today about 2007 to 2017 students that graduated. In Manitoba, we had a student retention tax credit for anybody who graduated between those 11 years. Most people got a hold of it, but people that filed their own taxes or some people who went to their friend, relatives, somebody else that knew how to use the tax software may not have claimed it. So as much as those credits are gone, if you graduated between 2007 or 2017, or if you know somebody that graduated within that period of time, you want to make sure that they claim the Manitoba tuition income tax rebate or the portions that they were allowed to. Check with your tax professional if you graduated. They can take a look, see if you claimed it or not. Hate to leave the money sitting on the table. So that's it for today. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about RESPs. Part of the RSPs we're going to be talking about is how you invest in them and what they give you. And then when you take them out, how they're treated for tax purposes. And of course, if you have a child that does not go to school, what happens with the money? So tune in tomorrow. We're going to have a long conversation about it and make sure that everybody knows everything they need to know about RESPs. Again, if you like the series, like what we're doing, share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter, like us, follow us, let people know what we're doing because this is just all for you.